I'm going to be talking about different movie directors within the freedom movement, which is also one and the same as the entertainment industry, as we'll see in the course of this video. And I'll be making more videos talking about various movies, documentaries, and TV series, as well as the directors and their affiliations. So this particular production company called Chronicle Brothers, they're responsible for Trucking for Freedom. It says Chronicle Brothers embedded themselves within the Canadian trucker convoy, capturing the unifying pulse of everyday people. The film lays bare a deep and broadening value within a country known for unity and trust, and how 2 years of lockdowns illuminated the disparity in the working class and the political landscape. It gives a raw and unpolished visual of diverse Canadians holding a gutted Canadian charter up to a spotlight and hoping to be heard. So, for one thing, the Canadian Charter and the Canadian Constitution as a whole is something gutted as a whole and was never built for us to begin with. And I'm just going to read Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. It says, charter rights can be limited by law so long as those limits can be shown to be reasonable in a free and democratic society. Which, exactly, they can basically, it says, if it's shown to be reasonable, who is the judge of that? Well, judges, attorneys, and lawyers are all swearing their oath to the Temple Bar, essentially. They don't work for us. So they can trample over your commercial rights at will, if you please. And as well, just to talk about the truck convoy very briefly here, I just want to say that it's part of the Illuminati card game, which was around since the early 90s, and there's predictive programming going from 9/11 to the Boston bombing and other events. So, as well, I've made about 3 different videos having to do with the truck convoy. So, and I've called out a lot of those actors on the world stage, such as Daniel Bulford, Tamara Leach, and the JCCF, Tom Quiggin, and others. So the 2 directors of the particular movie are Andrew Peloso and Jeremy Regato, and they're also the directors of Chronicle Bros, the corporation or production company responsible for Trucking for Freedom, which is a docu-series actually. So I think it's 6 parts. Jeremy Regato I didn't manage to find very much about. However, I'm just going to read this little blurb here. It says that he spent his entire career developing creative solutions in the tech, media, and marketing industry, and prior to directing Trucking for Freedom, Jeremy's adventure spirit has taken him all over the world, working with colleagues in the film industry to tell new and engaging stories. So, Andrew Peloso now, he has got an interesting resume. Founder of Vec Labs Production, which is a video agency that is dedicated to bringing cinematic visuals to businesses. With a background in philosophy from the University of Alberta, Andrew has a passion for storytelling and has focused his career on finding human stories, social issues, and culture demonstrated commercially or artistically. Andrew is currently working on 2 docudramas set to be released later in 2023. And before starting in Vec Labs, he worked as a marketing consultant in Rome, Italy, where he consulted for the migrants and refugee section of Integral Human Development within the Vatican. He specialized in visual and narrative marketing for international nonprofits and has a strong desire to use his skills to bring truth, goodness, and beauty to all his projects. You say so. So some of the clients that Vec Labs has taken on. Vec Labs includes Andrew Peloso, Riley Patton, and John Cubid. So there have been different people selling products. As well, you have the energy and oil industry, the Alberta government, and other marketing firms and that sort of a thing. So as well, the one unique one that I found here was The Gathering, which is almost like a sort of conference of different corporate CEOs and marketing experts and famous people such as Tony Hawk, who I've seen attend, all getting together and discussing different marketing techniques and that sort of a thing. So, interestingly enough, they've been one of the clients for Andrew Peloso of Vec Labs. So, another one of the documentary makers, we have Mickey Willis, who's the founder of Elevate, which is a production company, and they have dealt with some of the most prolific creators of socially conscious media, and he's been granted access into the hearts of world-renowned philosophers, scientists, physicists, doctors, authors, shamans, and human development experts, that sort of a thing. So these are some of the things that he has produced, including those two movies that have the word plan in the title. I cannot say the name of those things. I'd like to keep this video on YouTube. And he's also been a director as well of those same films. So, Elevate is the production company. It says, we are Elevate, a little production company on a big mission, and we live to the fullest in this place in California. Population 8,000. 1 hour north of Los Angeles. We're close enough to play in Hollywood, yet far enough to create our own game. The game we love most is producing filmed works of art that make us feel good about being human, if you say so. So again, here is one of the films that is directed by Mickey Willis and written by him as well. So you have G. Edward Griffin, who created the creature from Jekyll Island, which is a book that is written by him. And then you have Christine Anderson, Julian Assange, Del Bigtree, who I've made a video about as well. I spoke about him briefly, actually, not the main subject. I'll leave links in the description for things that I have made videos of, from the truck convoy to where I've spoken about Del Bigtree, some of the nurses, and as well policing organizations, which we'll get to. So, this particular video here, which is a trailer of sorts by Mickey Willis here, it's interesting because it's like a combination of psychological warfare and advice. So he says that nearly every organized resistance he's been a part of has been inches away from victory and failed because of infighting, and he warns because of rumors being spread. And he claims that he has yet to experience a time when a label like controlled opposition is actually accurately applied, and suspiciously it's those close to making real progress. So it's interesting enough because he glorifies certain people such as Dr. Robert Malone, who I've also called out in video myself, and as well he says that once rumors are clear from certain people, he said that there's still a certain element of doubt that's left, and that's all done by design. So, and he says as well, in his words, I'm not suggesting that we look the other way when someone is clearly thwarting our forward momentum. There are people who deserve to be called out by name, especially those who are undermining our trust in each other. But even then, we should remember that there is a human life being affected by our words. So he said but right in the middle of a sentence there, which is almost like saying, ignore everything else I have just said. Now here's what I'm saying. But even then, we should remember that there is human life being affected by our words. So it's almost like he's throwing out aspects of uncertainty on purpose, and while he is warning of things like controlled opposition at face value, he is also indirectly advising not to call these people out, because he's saying to remember that there is a human life affected by our words. Meanwhile, he's also speaking in like double negatives by saying that these people undermining our trust in each other should be called out by name. It's almost like these operatives want you to either blindly trust people and go along with things because of blind faith, or they simply want you to trust nobody and be on the defensive consistently. It's almost like an order out of chaos motto is really applied here, and the end result is confusion, fear, and anger. It seems like those are their three outcomes for the game that they play, which is the Ordo ad Chao or Order of Chaos game. And while he also says that every major movement that he's been a part of has been suspiciously taken down through gossip and different labels such as controlled opposition, the thing is, every major movement in history has been controlled opposition, as the narrative is always controlled on both sides. And this is the way things have been done pretty well since the time of Rome. So, giving you some example here in history is what I'm going to do. I'm going to talk about something called Operation Trust. And the best way to sum this up is through the quote of Vladimir Lenin, where he said, "The best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves." So, Operation Trust was a counterintelligence operation set up by the Operation Trust was a counterintelligence operation of the State Political Directorate of the Soviet Union. So the operation, which was set up by the GPU's predecessor, Chika, ran from 1921 to 1926, set up a fake anti-Bolshevik resistance organization, Monarchist Union of Central Russia, in order to help the OGPU identify real monarchists and anti-Bolsheviks. The real front company was called the Moscow Municipal Credit Association. So what the Soviet Union did is they set up a fake anti-Bolshevik organization in order to lure those people in with anti-Bolshevik views, and that is how you find out who they really are. It's just very much like the truck convoy is set up so that the government and other forces that puppet the government know who the people are that oppose the coercive measures that were taking place, resulting in different actions people were forced to take, like these certain experimental medical procedures that were forced upon people, and privileges and rights and things were taken away from people. So that's how the truck convoy was a way to label those people. It's not to say that everybody on the ground was a bad person or anything like that. It's just unfortunately people were fooled, and that's the reality of it. So this is another documentary which I can't say the name of, unfortunately. But we see the stars here. It mentions Dale Bigtree, Alex Jones as well. And then gonna move forward, mention another documentary very briefly, Died Suddenly. This one, Stu Peters is essentially the face of, but the directors and writers are Matthew Miller-Scow and Nicholas Stomphauser. So I'm going to speak about them very briefly. They were in this interview on this show called His Glory, and Nicholas Stomphauser basically says that in addition to Matt's technical and filmmaking skills, he's also been to Davos and the World Economic Forum, and he also mentions a quote-unquote bioweapon that leaks out of China, which is a propagated make-believe illness. And so there's an element of fear and disinformation there placed in the air as well. So he mentions that, or Matthew says that when he was at Davos, he was there in 2018 and 2020 with President Trump, and he interviewed Yuval Harari on the floor, and he describes Yuval as the World Economic Forum's sort of prophet, which I'd say is definitely an accurate description. However, the thing that I want to say is, how was Matthew able to interview someone from the World Economic Forum and at Davos in particular? Like, this is the kind of thing that I bring in question, because the only people that I've seen able to do that are people like Luke Rudkowski of We Are Change, who seems to coincidentally leave Mossad in Israel out of his stories when speaking about 9/11, or what's his name from Press for Truth, Dan Dix, propagates the idea that he woke Maxime Bernier up to that of the deep state, when, for one thing, deep state isn't even a term that I use, when the reality is Max is sworn into the Privy Council and has a long history of working with globalists and different think tanks and the sort. So it's all an act, is what I'm getting at. And what I'm saying is, how are you able to interview someone like this is the question, really. So how do you get close to someone like that? Anyway, it says here that he is a historian, philosopher, and author of bestsellers Sapiens, A Brief History of Mankind, Homo Deus, Brief History of Tomorrow, and 21 Lessons for the 21st Century. He's the co-founder of Sapienship, a multidisciplinary organization advocating for a global responsibility whose mission is to clarify the public conversation, support the quest for solutions, and focus attention on the most important challenges we're facing today, such as technological disruption, ecological collapse, and the nuclear threat. So, essentially all these talks of cyber attacks and depopulation and that sort of a thing, that's kind of like Yuval Harari's game, if you will. Just one of the faces of the World Economic Forum, and calling him the prophet of the World Economic Forum was actually an accurate description of Matthew Sco. So this in particular, it says is a TV series, but I remember this organization, Policing for Freedom. I called them out in Policing for Freedom Part 2. I made a 3-part series that had to do with the controlled opposition freedom policing groups in Canada, which also include other justice officials and such as corrections officers or even firefighters and that sort of a thing. So some of the actors that are involved in this TV series are Daniel Bulford, Maria Shidare, I don't know if I pronounced that right at all, Vincent Gersies, Charlene Lynch, Jessica DiGiovanni, she's from Canadian Frontline Nurses. And so, interestingly enough, we see some of those names and faces in this organization here, which, again, I've already spoken about them in previous video. It was part 2 of Policing for Freedom, I believe. So that's where you have Vincent Gersies, Maria Chirade, Maria Chirderis, I'm sorry, I'm going to just stop now, Charlene Lynch, etc. So this is like an international policing organization, if you will, with a lot of Canadian members. And then we have here this particular French title here, which translates to, I'm not going to say the first word, Divock 19, testify to break the silence. So it's written by this particular individual, Samuel Grenier, and some of the cast members. We see Christine Anderson there as well. So, and there are other cast members as well in this, like Maxime Bernier and Sebastian Desautels. Lamont Daigle is on this list. Daniel Bulford. There's archive footage of Tucker Carlson. You have Sarah Chunian from Canadian Frontline Nurses. And again, if somebody just wants to see the names for themselves, they can feel free to look at the list, because I'm sure that there's going to be names that people will pick up here that I'm obviously going to end up missing in this video, as there's a lot of different movies, a lot of different series, documentaries, etc. So Samuel Grenier here, it says this is basically a financing and accounting firm here. So I gather that he is a financial advisor of sorts. And so here, weirdly enough, the reason why I'm choosing an anti-hate article here, it says Samuel Grenier, the organizer of a protest that forced Montreal's largest to shut down, has found a home as a vocal proponent of an ex-Rebel Media employee, now the leader of Conservative Party of Quebec, Eric Duhaime. So Rebel News and the Canadian Anti-Hate Network talking about how the narrative is controlled on both sides. The common ground that Rebel News and the Anti-Hate Network work off of is fear. However, the reality is each of their points that they make are just direct opposites of each other, and that is the very point of media, because media is a Greek sorceress who casted illusions. You have Rebel News, which Ezra Levant, the founder of Rebel News, attended Fraser Institute, which is funded by corporate think tank, the Atlas Network, which is largely funded by the Koch family, and as well Ezra is close friends of Stephen Harper. So Rebel News is playing out one side of the narrative, and then the anti-hate network is the more, we'll say, left-wing. I don't even like terms like left-wing and right-wing, but more lefty kind of terms and ideas thrown out there, you know, being accused of being a racist or having white privilege and that sort of a thing is what the anti-hate network is good for. So in this comment here it says Eric Duhaime is so much more than what he's described as here. It says he's an ex-operator for Ned. He was in Iraq during the restructuration that impoverished or killed hundreds of thousands. He also lobbied for Benson and Hedges before touring all the right-wing media, trash radios, etc. So Eric Duhaime is definitely an interesting individual, as he is the co-founder of the Quebec Freedom Network, and he's apparently labeled this sort of dangerous individual here. He was a blogger for The Canoe, contributed to Dumont 360. Yeah, he was basically on talk shows and, you know, was labeled as spreading right-wing trash, but yes, that is, I guess, true. Again, just playing into one side of the narrative there, we could see the bias in that comment that I read. However, fact of the matter is it says here he candidly worked for a non-profit organization dedicated to development of democracy throughout the world. We'll see that that's BS in a moment. And he worked through bombs and checkpoints. He worked for what's called the National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, which is one of the wings of the National Endowment for Democracy, or NED. So I'm just going to bring up this picture here so you can see the funding here. I don't know about all of these 4 different organizations, but you have a Democratic Institute and a Republican Institute. So essentially what NED does is they fund different political uprisings, and they destabilize the nation's economic systems, their trade deals, and as well meddle in different political situations. And the National Endowment for Democracy, I have already done a video about, so I'll leave a link in the description for that. But essentially, the National Endowment for Democracy was set up as a legal window for the CIA to carry on its covert activities. It was set up in 1983 during the Reagan administration because the CIA was under a lot of different scrutiny because of their various scandals, rightfully so. And as well, it says that it says Alan Weinstein, who helped develop the draft legislation establishing NED, was quite candid that he said in 1991, a lot of what we do today was done covertly, I think they meant to say covertly, 25 years ago by the CIA. In effect, CIA has been money laundering through NED, which kind of makes sense there. In order to leave their name out of the picture, they would have a sort of arm, if you will, or rather, if you think about it this way, the brain would be like the CIA, the body would be the National Endowment for Democracy, and either its left or right-wing arms attached to it, which would probably be money laundering fronts for the CIA, would be the arms of operation. So it says here the endowment has 4 principal initial recipients of funds: the International Republican Institute, National Democratic Institute for International Affairs, which is an affiliate of the American Center for International Labor Solidarity. So I guess an affiliate of the American Union Association, or one of, and an affiliate of the Chamber of Commerce. So it's a pretty interesting kind of, I'd say, powerful organization that a lot of people don't really know exists. And I actually questioned Maxime Bernier about the National Endowment for Democracy, as well as there was some time ago where Canada was meddling in affairs in Haiti, essentially, and that is the subject matter of the video in which I speak about Ned. So, yeah, and this over here is Eric Duhaime, who I was mentioning had done work for Ned, and I'm going to leave some links in the description here that have to do with some of the different things that Ned has taken part in, and you can read for yourself. But in a nutshell, here's what I wanna close with here is there's way too many actors and directors for me to do in one video, so I'll have to do several videos. However, any directors I didn't speak about yet, I will be covering in future videos. And as well, something I've noticed is that essentially since 2020, organizations like Bilderberg, World Economic Forum, and United Nations have been brought into view of the general public on way more of an apparent level than it was done so prior to 2020. And the idea of being a quote-unquote freedom fighter, if you will, was sort of broadcasted to a lot of people because everybody was subject to traumas and facing some sort of dilemmas in the face of those coercive measures that were taking place. And the idea of being a freedom fighter was something, if you will, that people were trying to draw you into, like a honeypot operation. And it became a piece of entertainment and something commercial. And this was this had to be done as they were. This basically had to be done because they were moving into a time of revealing some of the cards on the table, if you will, and with the coercive measures that were taking place, there needed to be some sort of reasonable sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? There had to be a sort of reasonable criticism, if you will, of something very large taking place in order to convince the public of a general narrative and in order to have people fall into different sort of honeypot operations, if you will, because not everyone is going to go for just one singular narrative. So there has to be many. And then, of course, when you dive into the freedom movement, there are various types of people that are all built for attracting different kinds of people, whether they advocate for a political solution or they don't advocate for a political solution, whatever it is, right? So, and then they have different organizations where they hold different types of people, like police officers or veterans, paramedics, doctors, or whatever, on different pedestals. And we shouldn't be holding different people on a pedestal for something that they've done or been a part of. The reality is all of those people in those movements, all those notable faces, are just actors that are essentially placed there in order to confuse us in such a manner where we either have blind faith and idolize them, or we get to the point of distrusting absolutely everybody. And the reality is, no, you shouldn't trust anybody 100%. You should have your own sense of discernment, but you also can't blindly lash out at people either. There has to be some sort of evidence or something brought forward that can be proven in order to speak about people as controlled opposition and such. So basically, the game that they set up is either we pick our favorite actors and go up against other actors, or we just essentially waste our time calling out the puppets like Bill Gates and such, when those are just punching bags set up for us to punch. And we think we're making a difference when we're doing things like that, but all we've done is really swap dishes of opium. So I'm just going to say to people is that you should use your own discernment and be your own hero. So whatever it is you think is the right thing to do, I personally feel that people should always be preparing for any sort of type of emergency scenario. So having canned goods or different materials that people can use for you to trade with is probably a good idea. And as well, I'm just going to specifically stress once again is to use your own discernment and be your own hero in your own story, because all in all, we can't keep just falling for whatever is handed to us. We need to at some point make a sort of stand in a peaceful manner, and we have to be able to build ourselves up to be people that can stand up for ourselves and for others, and not be afraid of the backlash either. Because at the end of the day, like I'm saying, the narrative is always controlled on both sides, and there will always be actors on both sides of an agenda in order to confuse you. So, all in all, ask what you like, comment if you want, or ask to get a hold of me, and I'll give out contact information to anybody that wishes to discuss this kind of subject matter a little further. But all in all, I'm just going to say, take care of yourselves and use your own discernment. Thanks for watching.